Hi, welcome everyone in Facebook Live world and in YouTube, and of course our regular viewers on Zoom as well. So today we're going to take a journey together, and I've decided to call this talk Things You Should Quit Right Now. Things you should quit right now. I'm not gonna today pretend that I'm gonna give you any major revelations. Pretty much everything that I'm going to tell you today, most people know already. They are ideas and thoughts that we've all had and we all live with. But from my counseling practice and the therapeutic work I do with people, especially couples that I work with, I've found that there are certain self-destructive ways of thinking and definitely ways of acting that kind of go against what we're all trying to achieve in life. So I've called this Things to Quit Right Now. This is not a talk on healthy eating and exercise. We're going to take it as a given that we all need to improve our eating habits and our exercise habits. This is a series every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, on getting better at being you. So these are going to be changes which we all should be attempting to make when it comes to our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and eventually God as well. That's going to be our topic for today. So we are right now in a very special and wonderful period between Pesach and Shavuot. And we've mentioned a few times that this period, these 49 days, were kind of set aside in the Torah and especially in Jewish life as being times when we work on ourselves. We're trying to get to the pinnacle of Shavuot. We're trying to get to the time when we are able to receive the Torah from Hashem, from God. And that's a time, that's a period, that's a challenge that takes weeks. And that's one of the reasons that the holiday is called Shavuot weeks, because it's all about the build-up until we get there. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to try to work on a few things that we can possibly all have room for improvement in, because there's room for improvement, as we've said before. So the first thing we're going to talk about today, hi Caroline, nice to see you. The first thing we're going to talk about today is things to quit right now. Number one is overthinking. Now, I know it sounds a bit weird because this is a rabbi talking and I do a lot of counseling and we spend most of our days thinking, right? And describing things to people and explaining things to people and thinking. I'm not saying give up on thinking. I'm talking about specifically overthinking things. And this has been a big challenge I've found over the past year, of course, of Corona, where people have kind of like sat in their own homes, haven't ventured out on vacations or shopping as much as they used to. And we're kind of wallowing in our own thoughts. And overthinking can be, especially in relationships, a big, big problem. And I want to base this upon a statement. And I wanted to just kind of like download the statement into your minds and think about this statement for sure. And that is that we humans, I believe, are not rational beings. We're not rational. We may seem rational and we may think we're making rational decisions about the options that come up to us in life, but really we're not rational beings. We're emotional beings. And every decision that we make, no matter how rational we think we are being, ultimately, we're being emotional in what we do. And that's who we are. We are essentially souls with neshamot. We're essentially people who want to achieve the best for ourselves, most people, and the best for other people. And the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis are not usually going to be from our minds, they're going to be from our hearts. Trying to involve our minds in decision makings is going to be a very, very difficult and challenging process, because we kind of like want to just get the job done. And I'm talking about even the smartest people. I counsel and work with people who are extremely smart. I'm talking with billionaires in business I've had the honor of working with, and smart rabbis and mothers and fathers and business people and lawyers, dentists, you name it, every profession. People you would think are very rational when it comes to making decisions, but ultimately they're not. We actually act more with our hearts than we do with our minds. And so one of the problems that people have is that they will overcompensate and overthink a problem and just stay immobilized. And one of the challenges that comes with overthinking let me explain a little bit more, is that we end up kind of sitting on one thing rather than taking an action. And this is a problem. And the problem is that, as I've mentioned in previous classes, we, the Jewish people, are the people of Naaseh v'nishma. We do and then we think. And that sounds a bit strange. Naaseh v'nishma? I'm going to do it and then I'm going to think about it. And the answer is yeah. And we actually learn that from a number of stories in the Torah and Jewish history. One of the most famous ones, of course, which we mentioned before, is this guy Nachshon ben Aminadav. And Nachshon ben Aminadav was one of the people who is the unsung hero of Kriyat Yam Suf, when the sea split, the Red Sea split, 7 days after the Jewish people left Egypt. And we know the Jewish people were there, and they were, put it any other way, they overthought the process. What are we doing over here? How do we get to this point? We're about to be killed. And they prayed and they were challenged and they tried every option until God turned around and said, that's enough. You've got to just go. And Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was a prince of the tribe of Judah, just jumped into the water. He just said, I've had enough. And if we don't take an action, nothing's going to happen. And God concurred and said, you guys are overthinking this process. At some point, you need to have what's called in Hebrew bitachon. And that is faith in the future. We have this thing called emunah. Emunah is faith on things that happened in the past. But that's important. Really you want bitachon. And that's really going to be faith into the future. And that's the naaseh. That's the action. And then I'm going to try to figure out how to navigate my way through this new reality that I've just entered into my life. I'm going to add to this overthinking thing something which is kind of related, I have found, especially again dealing with couples and families, and that is overreacting. You see, many times people will react, this is really its own point, will overreact to things they're experiencing in life and make big things out of things that don't need to be so big. Things come up in life, challenges and problems, and we overthink them. And one of the problems when you overthink is that you overreact. And overreacting can be a big, big problem. Somebody will say one thing to you and it becomes a whole big production. And you'll need someone else come along and be like, I hear you're frustrated or upset about what that person said or did, but the biggest problem you could do is to overreact to what actually happened. I'll tell you a weird analogy or metaphor to this, but it is true. We know statistically there's a thing that people will unfortunately do, and they'll put their hands through a window and smash a window with their hand or with a foot. Happens to be that for whatever reason, when you put your hand through a window and smash that window, you don't actually cause too much pain or damage to your hand. I guess because the force is pushing your hand through the window and the glass is breaking outwards. What happens is people freak out, which is understandable. They pull their hand back and all the remaining glass that is there is going to end up ripping and shredding their hand on the way back. You actually do more damage reacting to what happened, although it's an understandable reaction. If you put your hand through glass, what you want to do is get your hand back. But it's ironic that you actually do more damage to your hand by pulling it back quickly than when you push it through in the first place. So I think that's a good metaphor for so many problems and challenges we all go through. We'll make decisions and we'll smash certain things in relationships and make decisions that we probably shouldn't have made. Rather than overthinking or overreacting, we just kind of like pull back, we retract. More damage comes from the retraction, the overreaction, than from the initial damage that was done from our bad decisions. Okay? So overreacting is something that needs to happen. And one of the things that I have found that people overreact about is other people's opinions. They will say, you don't need to be spoken to like that. You don't deserve to be like this. And they're going to hear this from other people. And I deal with especially couples who are thinking to get married, people saying, you should marry this person. No, definitely don't marry this person. You should date this person. Definitely do not date this person. Right? And you should do... And I always say to them, in the end, it's your life. People say to me, should I marry this person? Should I get married or not? And I'm like, I'll give you my opinion about some of the challenges and hurdles you may face by either marrying or not marrying them. But in the end, no matter what anyone says, me or your parents or your friends or your therapist, makes no difference. In the end, it's your life. And you're the one that's going to have to wake up the morning after your wedding, look at this person who's lying next to you, and be like, this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. It's your decision, ultimately. Which takes us to maybe the second or third thing that you have to quit right now. So overthinking for sure, overreacting especially, fearing change. This is something which I've seen immobilize individuals. And I'd like to give you a metaphor for this idea of fearing change. First of all, change in Judaism is seen as a good thing, which sounds weird because, we're one of the people who are traditional. We do the same things in our lives, with our family, our friends for hundreds or thousands of years, right, based upon our religion. But actually, change is a good thing. There's an interesting expression called shinui makom, shinui mazal. Change your place and you'll change your mazal. Now, people take that term, which is actually correct in some ways as well, to refer to a geographical change. Change your place, change where you live, and your mazal will then change, ultimately we hope, for the better. Your mazal, your life is going to get better because of this change. But I believe that the change Chazal, the rabbis are talking about, is not merely a geographical change of packing up your house. Actually, it could be a change of behavior. It could be a change of friends, a job, and maybe even a house or an old and decaying relationship as well. And we have this fear. We have this fear of change that's always with us. But I always point out that the word shana is related to the word shinui. Shana means year. There has to be a new change that we go through. If we just keep doing the same things, as I always like to say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. That's just a part of life. Change seems a good thing, and it is machaper. It kind of like absolves us and gives us a new lease of life. I even tell people that when they walk to work, and I do this naturally at this point, I don't even think about it. People will take the same route to work every single day, and they'll walk the same streets and the same avenues and same walk through the park. And just change the way you walk to work. Right? You usually go down 5th Avenue, just go down 6th, even if it's a little bit longer. Just get yourself used to not being the same as you were yesterday, because really, you want to be a different person to who you were yesterday. There's an interesting halakha which just came to my mind, which I must mention to you. And most people are not aware of this Jewish law, this halakha. But did you know that when you enter into a synagogue, you enter through one door, and when you leave a synagogue, you should try to leave through a different door? That's a halakha, by the way. That is mentioned in a number of places. It's based upon the Beit HaMikdash. And in the Beit HaMikdash, there were different doors for entering and exiting. Why would that be? Why would there be different doors for walking into the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, and leaving the Beit HaMikdash? What's the big deal? Why can't I just walk into my synagogue through one door and then walk out the other door? And if you're able, sometimes synagogues don't have another form of egress, but if you're able, you should use a different door. And the idea is that when you enter into the synagogue for whatever prayer, whatever program, or maybe a class, when you leave, you shouldn't be the same person. Just that 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 1 hour, whatever amount of time you were there, I'm a different person. And you actually represent that by leaving through a different door. That's the way you physically represent that idea. It's like, those old movies with the Fountain of Youth, you used to walk into the room one way and walk out another. I'm a different person. So this disease of fearing change really is a problem. And, I want to mention a metaphor which was given by, and I think many of you may have heard this one before, if not from me, then definitely from the original source, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, who left this world not so long ago. And he gave such a beautiful metaphor. And I read this metaphor and I heard it from him 30 years ago, and it stayed with me, and it became popular in the past year or so. And the metaphor is actually lobsters. And he talks about how I was actually in a doctor's surgery reading one of these Nature magazines that they used to have in surgeries. And the question was posed in this article, how do lobsters grow? Which is a great question, which you never really think about. Why is it a big question? Well, lobsters are little, I've never seen a baby lobster, but I'm sure they're very cute and small with little hard shells. but eventually they're going to have to get bigger. Now, I always thought that the shells grow as they grow as well. The answer is no. Lobster shells don't grow, actually, because they're hard, right? They're crustacea. They don't actually grow. So how does a baby lobster become a daddy or mummy lobster? It's a fair question, which most of us don't think about because we have social lives. But the answer is fascinating. We can learn a great thing from the lobster. And he mentions that what they do is they actually shed their shell. They take their shell off. But when the shell comes off, which is small, they become open to and vulnerable to prey. Because one of the reasons that lobsters have hard shells is that so other animals, fish and other aquatic life cannot attack them. So once you shed your shell, you become vulnerable. So what this lobster does is it has to kind of like hide itself, grow, however long that takes, and then a new, harder, larger, full shell grows over it. In order to grow, in order to change, you have to sometimes put yourself away because it's difficult and you become open to threats that you had with your hard shell. What happens is, let's move to the understanding of the metaphor, is that we go through these periods of life where it's time to change and it's time to grow, but we're scared to remove these things from us that have kept us safe for so long, these old behaviors, these old relationships, these old friendships, these old jobs, whatever they are. So what we do is we kind of like end up growing inside the shell, and the shell starts to become painful because it's not big enough to accommodate the new you. So what people do is, wow, I'm in pain. So what do? They drink alcohol, they take drugs, they get involved in self-defeating behaviors, bad relationships, thinking that's going to cure the pain. But that's not going to do it because the shell is just too small and you've got to change your life. So what you need to do is take the old shell off, whatever that old shell means to you. And I'm sure it means something to everyone watching right now, and give yourself a chance to grow and to find a new version of yourself. That's the perfect metaphor for fearing change. Change is difficult. It's, as my wife calls it, discombobulating. But rarely have I found people who've really gone for professional advice and realized that this is a time for change and shed those things that have held them back from the past, those thoughts, ideas, behaviors, and not grown through the process, even though it's been difficult. And this kind of takes us to the next thing that everyone should quit, and that is living in the past. You know, I again, in my counseling practice, I found that most things that stop relationship progressing are people living in the past. And living in the past can mean a number of things. For some people, it means financially, right? The people who say, I should have invested in Apple, right? I should have invested in Bitcoin a year or 6 months ago. And the answer is you didn't. But if you keep bringing it up, it's going to hold you back from doing what you need to do today, right? One thing you'll notice that you can learn from the past, but that's different from living in the past. And there are people who literally live their entire lives constantly just living in the past, in the shadows of something that should have been shed and moved on from a long time ago. I mean, again, I sit in counseling sessions. I keep mentioning that metaphor because that's what the world I live in for a lot of the time. People are like, you know, and she promised me 8 years ago, and he said to me when we first got married, how you married 20 years? I'm like, you know, 20 years ago, you were a different people. Like, things change. Things change. And if you keep reminiscing about the past, there is not going to be any way forward. And sometimes it's nice to kind of live in the past, to feel the celebrations and relationships and events and vacations, but that's not the way to go through life. And I found that's why the Torah does not mention the past too much. The word I haven't looked at the amount of times the Torah will use the word etmol yesterday, but it definitely uses the word hayom today a lot. It doesn't even talk about the future that much, by the way. It doesn't talk about the future at all, pretty much. The entire premise of Judaism is to live in the present. And by the way, not only good things from the past, also bad things from the past. Many people are stuck in past relationships and they import them into their present relationships. And much of life is there to break them. I don't know the reason why some people just get hooked up on bad relationships and bad marriages and are not able to progress, you know. We've all had challenges and sufferings from the past. We have to learn to live in the present, learn from the past, but not be immobilized from the past. So living in the past is definitely something you need to quit. And part of that is just not talking about it. I know it sounds weird, but it just shouldn't be part of our day-to-day decisions. By the way, this list can go on forever, and I only have another few minutes. So I'm just going to download the rest of them and see where we get to. Number 4, which, or maybe this is number 5, is I found that people, a lot more than they used to, put themselves down. Really put themselves down and don't think enough about themselves, you know, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. I'm like, I should have done better, and I should have said this, and I shouldn't have said that, and why? And we really get into this habit, and there's a word in Hebrew which I believe really encapsulates, it's called yush, and that is like really to despair, and people end up giving up on themselves, and one thing that triggers that is that they put themselves down. I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, and they will talk bad about themselves. And I'm going to mention that this is one of the things we talk about this time of year is Lashon Hara, you know, and obviously not speaking it. But did you know, according to the Chafetz Chaim, it's a problem to even speak Lashon Hara about yourself? That sounds weird because I'm talking about me, right? I'm not affecting myself by talking bad about myself. The answer is you are. If you always talk about, you know, I'm such an idiot, I'm such a fool. These words come out of our mouths, but if we say them, we get to believe them. And so, although there's this track playing in our heads all the time, this little inner voice that is constantly there saying, you're such a, why do you have to say that? Why, you know, at least when it comes to saying things, say good things about yourself, you know, because the chances are, I mean, not even chances, probabilities are high that you're actually a pretty good person. And most of what you do and say is pretty good. We all mess up. We all say and do stupid things. But putting yourself down to yourself and to others, I found is very, very self-defeating and doesn't give us a chance. And related to this is, I think it's related to this, is people who are constantly the victim. They're constantly the victim of other people. I guess this is his own point, actually, you know? And they always blame other people for their own faults and their own misbehaviors. Right? Being the victim is, why does it happen to me? And why do I have to deal with this? And why me? Why me? And the answer is, most of the time, you kind of created it yourself, whether you realize it or not. And we all love to blame others for our failures. And I get this is its own point. This is something else we all have to quit. And it's just, it feels good to blame other people. I spoke about one of the key traits we mentioned of narcissists are that they just cannot own and take responsibility for their own mistakes and failures. They always seem to need to put onto someone else, whether it's their children, whether it's their spouses, their bosses, their employees, their employers, right? Their parents who may have been dead for 50 years. It makes no difference, you know? And they're always the victim and always poor me. And that ends up becoming a major, you know, I mentioned that we're now between Pesach and Shavuot. Interestingly, Shavuot has a few names in the Torah. One of them is weeks, right? The weeks up to Shavuot, because it's all about the build-up. You're going to receive the Torah, and the more you build up through programs like this and ideas and classes like this that get our heads into self-improvement, the better receiving the Torah will be. That's what the rabbis tell us. That's why it's called Shavuot. But there's another name for Shavuot, which I must mention, that is Atzeret. Atzeret. And Atzeret has a few interpretations. That's exactly what that word means. One of the words that Atzeret is related to is Latzor, to stop. It's to stop. And a great point, we're always thinking we constantly have to work on ourselves, but there gets to a point where, you know, I'm done. I've had enough, you know, and I've heard this from a lot of people over the past 3-4 months, you know, when I speak to them, you know, and I do speak to a lot of people, obviously, when it comes to, you know, self-growth and working ourselves. And one of the things I've heard a lot is I've just had enough. You know, I've had enough of this disease or this plague or this relationship. It's like kind of like Dayenu, enough. And part of Shavuot is I've had enough and I want to enjoy the moment. I want to live, and I've had enough of the bad relationship or the bad friendship, or the way people are telling me what to do, whatever it is, right? Latzor, right? Atzeret, right? I want to stop. I've had enough, and I want to enjoy the moment for just being the moment without anything else. And maybe that's one of the reasons that we don't see on Shavuot too much going on. Really, there's no specific mitzvah we do. Okay, we start learning, but you don't even have to do that, right? There's no shofar, there's no etrog, there's no lulav, there's no sukkah, there's no fat. You just get to be present and just stop. And it's very similar to Shemini Atzeret. At the end of Sukkot, after you've done 30 days of Elul and Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of Teshuvah and Yom Kippur and then all of Sukkot, that's it, I'm done. I just want to sit and be present in the moment. Okay, I have just a few more minutes. Again, this list can go on, maybe we'll continue. But again, this is just a list of things that people need to quit in order to just get the most out of life. I think what I'm telling you today are certain things that I have found through my counseling that really immobilizes people from becoming the best version of themselves. Next, I think this is number 6 or 7. I'm not even sure. You can rewatch this and you can number them if you want to and send them to me as numbers. And that is people trying to please everyone. People trying to please everyone. Now, not everyone has this. Right? Some people just don't have, I don't know why some people have this and some people don't. Maybe they're created this way. Maybe they were brought up with a better outlook on life. But as I like to say, people who try to please everyone end up pleasing no one, especially themselves. Because you cannot make everyone happy all the time. And listen, people love, I don't know what it is. But there's this disease that I've found that some people have. They just love to criticize other people. They just love it. There's a guy in my synagogue, but everything that comes out of his mouth is just always critical. And I'm sensitive to that. I'm always very wary and careful what I say of being misunderstood or misinterpreted, I don't want to end up doing that. I'm very, very careful about it, especially now that people are very, very sensitive to things. And some people just love to criticize. And no matter what you say or do, there are just some people who are always going to see the worst in what you say. And what I used to do, and I see many people do as well, they would bend themselves into a pretzel trying to get some kind of validation or affirmation from these individuals. And the answer is, my friends, and I'm telling you very clearly, they're just some people who are never going to be happy. There's nothing you can say. And they're just always going to be critical. And you're never doing it well enough, and your speech is not good enough, in your job, in your doctoring, your lawyering, your parenting. They're just always going to be that way. And the answer is you're not going to be able to change them. It just isn't. Stop trying to please those people. Right? They just live and they wallow in being critical of other people. Why do they have this disease? I don't know. Maybe they were beaten as a child or had a bad relationship. I don't know. But you know what? It's not my problem. And trying to please everyone, you're going to end up having a problem. First of all, it's going to affect the rest of your relationships because you only have so much bandwidth to try to please and bring goodness to the world. And some people are able to, and the older I get, and the older many people get, I found they're able to deflect and just kind of like ignore these comments that are just constantly coming to us, sometimes from other people, family members, or even from ourselves. You got to kind of like just, let go and let God as well. Yeah, I've run out of time. I don't like to exceed them. I'm just going to recap the main points because I said a lot today. But these are things to quit right now. And these things, as I mentioned, I find really debilitating when it comes to relationships and friendships and love and everything else. Number one is overthinking. At some point, you can sit with your therapist, your rabbi, your friends and overthink. But at some point, you've got to take an action. And again, I know people who are in their 40s and 50s who still haven't made something of their lives because they just overthink it. But at some point, you've just got to do. Related, we said it was overreacting. Things happen to us and we react. And you should react. It's a natural thing. But then there's sometimes overreacting to this. Then we spoke about fearing change. And change is a good thing. And it sounds weird because we're the Jewish people who've kept things going the same way for a long time. The answer is we're not actually. Right? We evolve as people. And fearing change ends us having to do with the next point, which is living in the past. And the past is there to learn from, But there's some people who just cannot escape from it, and they'll just talk about the good old days or the bad old days or things they should have done 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago. This can hold people back when it comes to creating a new life or lives for themselves. And putting yourself down, I found, is a big, big problem, you know? And you should feel proud about who you are and what you accomplish, you know? And this is very much part of having good self-esteem. And this takes us to the next point, which you should quit, and that's being the victim, right? Poor me and blaming other people for every problem in my life. You know, it's really, really not conducive to a healthy future for yourself. And that takes us to the final point, which is trying to please everyone. Ultimately, you're just not going to be able to please everyone. There's always people who think they're better. People than you, more considerate, kinder, and all the rest of it. And you know what? Maybe there are, right? There's always somebody doing something better than you. But trying to please everyone is going to be an exercise in futility, right? Because there's always going to be complaints, and really what they're complaining about is themselves. Okay, we'll stop over there. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you got something out of it. I will see you all, God willing, next week. We'll continue our series. Have a great and successful day.